You may be right in the sense that there is an unfair bias towards against the conservatives in Ottawa. I think that's probably true, and it's always been the case, generally speaking.
He might be right, but then you said it's always happened. Mark Carney's response to Donald Trump has become a pattern of capitulation. Concede first, obscure the cost, and hope Washington responds with restraint. Canada recently gave the US a share of revenue from a bridge Canadians fully financed. And before the dust had settled, Trump answered with another round of punishing tariffs. Carney told Canadians he could handle Donald Trump. But the people who voted for him certainly never expected it to look like this. Let's take a look. So, from Blacklocks today, new tariffs will cost Carney. Now, that's an interesting hidden meaning in there. Prime Minister Mark Carney last night acknowledged new U.S. tariffs will cost Canadians, but proposed no new initiatives. Under current law, it would take an act of Parliament to enter negotiations with the United States over dairy quotas. Quote, this trade dispute has raised costs for families, end quote, Carney wrote in a statement issued at 7:43 p.m. Eastern last night, hours after the U.S. detailed new tariffs. Quote, Canada believes in the benefits of free and fair trade, end quote, he added. Finance Minister Francois-Philippe Champagne and Canada-U.S. Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc did not comment. Parliament is currently on a 13-week summer recess. New U.S. tariffs hit a Canada tied in knots with contradictory trade policies. From the Globe and Mail, from Bloomberg. On Monday, the Trump administration said it would add a new 50% tariff on Canadian packaging products, textiles, horticulture items, and other goods, representing about 5% of its exports to the U.S. The levies are expected to come into effect around August 19th. The U.S. imposed tariffs because of what it described as unfair treatment of American alcohol, cars, and dairy. Earlier this month, the U.S. declined to extend its trade agreement known as USMCA with Canada and Mexico. This was Mark Carney's statement. Today, the United States administration announced its intention to impose a new 50% tariff on a significant number of Canadian goods. This is the latest in a series of unilateral U.S. trade actions that began with the U.S. imposing a series of tariffs in direct violation of the Canada-United States-Mexico Agreement, the free trade agreement between Canada, the United States, and Mexico. And as we've actually shown you, that's up for debate because there's actually a clause in the USMCA that would allow the United States to do this. These include tariffs on the Canadian auto sector in violation of CUSMA. Canada, as is its right, has merely matched those measures. More broadly, in response to these measures and threats to Canadian sovereignty, provinces, territories, and Canadians from coast to coast to coast have stood together, taking the necessary actions to support our economy and defend our workers, farmers, businesses, and families, which is basically the Prime Minister has done nothing. He's relied on Canadians to essentially shoulder the burden. Recognizing that the U.S. has been transforming all of its trade relationships, including those covered under CUSMA, over the past 18 months, Canada has made a series of detailed and comprehensive proposals to resolve this dispute and to modernize CUSMA. We stand ready to intensify those discussions in the coming weeks. Canada believes in the benefits of free trade and fair trade, as evidenced by our new government signing more than 20 new economic and security partnerships. Those aren't trade agreements, though. This trade dispute has raised costs for families, particularly in the U.S. Canada stands ready to engage intensively to address outstanding issues with the U.S. to the mutual benefit of our citizens. In all circumstances, Canada will work relentlessly and take any measures necessary to build our strength at home to support Canadian workers, farmers, businesses, and families. So, does this mean that Mark Carney is going to recall Parliament so they can get to work on this? Nope. Does this mean that Mark Carney is looking to formally, finally start negotiating with the United States? Doesn't sound like it. So what does that mean, intensively? Where have you been since you actually took office? Because you said this is the biggest crisis of our lifetimes. Shouldn't you have been working intensively back then? Were you working only casually? This is where Mark Carney is starting to get into deep trouble, because his promises are starting to catch up with him. You can't say, oh, well, now we're going to increase our efforts. Why weren't your efforts at maximum for this crisis of our lifetimes that you told Canadians that you got elected on? This is going to be the words that echo into all of the swing voters' minds. Conservative voters, everyone saw this coming. Everyone said this would happen, and nobody is actually surprised. But the surprise is starting to hit the swing voters. But this is just what happened today. What led up to today? This is what we want to talk about. So, a few days ago, Bloomberg put out this article. Canada-US Bridge Pact omits Canada's debt costs. Document shows. Canada and the US agreed to split the profit from a new bridge between Ontario and Michigan for 15 years. This is the Gordie Howe Bridge, everyone. With no provision to cover Canada's debt service costs on the project, according to a copy of the pact seen by Bloomberg News. The agreement, in principle, covering the Gordie Howe International Bridge appears to contradict earlier public remarks from Prime Minister Mark Carney. And it shows what Canada conceded to get the President Donald Trump's administration to stop blocking the 1.5-mile bridge over the Detroit River. Wait a minute. What did Mark Carney say earlier? Oh, yeah. This.
Prime Minister, we're looking for more information on the deal to open the Gordie Howe Bridge. Canada spent $6.4 billion to build it. Is the Canadian debt repayment on the bridge included as expenses before profits are split with the U.S.?
Well, let me say, first of all, that we're very pleased that the prospect of the bridge reopening later this month, or opening later this month. This is good for Canada, good for the United States, both in the short term and the long term. What we have with the agreement with the U.S. Is as follows. And let me start with what it isn't. It's not splitting the tolls of the bridge. It is an agreement for 15 years to split net revenues. Splitting of tolls, any sharing of the toll revenue won't happen until all of the debt is repaid.
So, Mark Carney specifically said that, debt's not included in this, and Bloomberg, who has a copy of this deal, which Canadians don't, by the way. Bloomberg is a U.S. news publication. So they have a copy of this, but Canadians do not have a copy of this. The opposition doesn't have a copy of this. You'd think that since we're the ones that paid for the fricking bridge, we should have a copy of this deal, Mark Carney. Now, the interesting thing is that what happened after this is, thanks to the U.S. media, thanks to our friends to the south, this actually forced Canadian media to start calling out the same thing. From the Globe and Mail, this was released on the 17th. It's a side deal to share Gordie Howe toll profits with U.S. doesn't include provision of debt repayment. 15-year deal struck by Canada and the United States on the Gordie Howe Bridge will see Ottawa cut Washington checks that amount to half the toll revenues, minus operating costs for the span connecting the Windsor and Detroit. Remember that he said that we weren't going to be splitting the tolls? Well, that's exactly what that says is going to happen. But Canada, which solely financed the $6.4 billion for the bridge, will not be subtracting any provision to repay debt from the annual payments to the United States, sources say. That means that we don't pay the debt first. That's what that means. That contradicts what Prime Minister Mark Carney said Sunday about debt when he played down the amount of money that would be sent to the U.S. for 15 years under this side agreement. Quote, we get the revenues, then the servicing costs of the bridge and paying the debt of the bridge, and then what's left over, there's a split of that for 15 years, end quote, Mr. Carney told CTV last Sunday, adding later, quote, there's not going to be a lot of net to split, end quote. Well, that's obviously the Globe and Mail saying Mark Carney didn't just contradict it, he flat out lied. Now, the Liberals have been running around trying to do damage control on this, and here's Captain Damage Control himself, Mark Garretson. So this is on Mark Garretson's Facebook page. Conservative MPs have no shame. Constant spreading of lies. So this is what was posted by Conservative MP Mark Dalton. Canadians built it. America cashes in. Tolls 50% to the U.S. for 15 years. Where is the deal behind it? Canada paid $6.4 billion, 100% of the cost. So there's nothing actually incorrect about that. But then Mark Gerritsen goes on and says, "You're outright lying, Mark. It's not 50% of the tolls, and you know this. Your leader is flaming out, and you should certainly start thinking about the future of the Conservative Party." This was just confirmed. It was confirmed by Bloomberg, and then it was further confirmed by the Globe and Mail. So yes, it's 50% of the tolls. Mark. Maybe you should check with the other Mark. And then you'll end up with Mark squared. And maybe you'll actually get to the bottom of this. Because this is what's happening with the Gordie Howe Bridge. And Canadians are not thrilled that this is actually happening. So here's some comments from the Globe and Mail article. And this is not pro-conservative people. These are people who voted for Mark Carney. I was a Carney fan, but lately he is not looking too intelligent. If Canada has backed down on the bridge deal and caved into the US, then close the bridge. Additionally, what has Dominic LeBlanc accomplished? He has been doing this for the last at least 2 years, and he is basically a Trudeau leftover. Is it not time for some new blood? Mexico appears to be further ahead than us, so something is not working here. If Carney got bullied on the bridge deal, then maybe he should go as well. Another comment. I don't know what to make of Carney. He does things from time to time that make absolutely no sense to me, and often it seems impulsively, as if he is so confident in his judgment he doesn't need to reflect or verify before he acts. I'm thinking of his initial support of Trump's Iran war too. He was out of the gate hailing it before anybody else, and now even a huge majority of Americans hate it, not to mention it was a war crime and gave Iran an excuse to interfere and close the Hormuz Strait. I think he signed an agreement on this bridge he couldn't have understood properly if his promise to never sign a bad deal for Canada was meant. Another one. Carney obviously knows the difference between revenues and profits, and that interest costs should be included in the calculations. He has obviously misled Canadians with respect to this deal. It didn't take long for the typical Liberal attitude of holding the truth to appear. Maybe this was the best deal we could get, given the shakedown from Trump. Carney could have said so. Instead, he chose to lie and obscure the details. Unfortunately, our PM would have been better off admitting to paying extortion and taking the wrath of supporters than BSing about the deal. Quote unquote, strike one in baseball parlance, and some of us only allow two for an out. So these are people that are not fans of the Conservatives. They voted for Carney. They're not liberal supporters because, well, a staunch Liberal supporter wouldn't be writing those things. These are people who sit in the middle that try and evaluate who they're going to vote for based on how they're feeling at the time and what they think is best. These are the voters we're trying to win over, folks. And you see that these are the exact voters that are saying, hold on a minute, this doesn't make any sense. Now, the interesting thing here is that not only did Mark Carney capitulate and then bang, Trump pushed the needle even more. Now, again, we're not any fan of Donald Trump doing this to Canada, but at the same time, where's Mark Carney the savior? That's what he was elected as, the savior of the Liberal Party, and he's done anything but. Trump continues to just ask for more and ask for more and ask for more. And Carney keeps giving it to him. So is it any surprise that Trump is just going to say, well, I'm going to push the needle even further and see what else I can get? Because I'm getting basically everything that I ask for. So the other thing that happened is Bob Fife, who ended up calling us a crazy right-wing YouTube channel, actually went on Aaron Pete's podcast, same podcast that Pierre Poilievre was on recently, and made a shocking admission. Not shocking as in, oh my God, I didn't know this, but it's shocking as in, well, you are part of this, and you are now making this admission. And this is all being caught up with the Gordie Howe Bridge and the tariffs and how Mark Carney's handling Donald Trump and how they're criticizing the Conservatives more than they're actually criticizing Mark Carney. Check out what Bob Fife said.
You may be right in the sense that there is an unfair bias against the Conservatives in Ottawa. I think that's probably true, and it's always been the case, generally speaking. But you cannot deny that what is going on right now is an internal war in the Conservative Party, and that and Pierre Poilievre is hanging by his fingernails, in my view. And Mark Carney's time is he will get much more critical coverage, for sure. But he's just been moving so fast on a whole range of areas that he's getting the benefit of the doubt.
So in one breath, he acknowledged, well, I think you might be right. Listen to what he says. You might be right. The Conservatives, maybe they get a harsher shake. But that's always happened? Wait a minute. So you said that he might be right, but then you said it's always happened. Okay, I'm going to take number 2 because that was a lot more definitive in terms of your answer. And then you immediately go to criticizing the Conservatives. Well, there's an internal war in the party. Is there, though? This is what the media is deliberately trying to say out there. The average Canadian thinks that every Conservative across the country, whether they're provincial or not, they're all part of the same party, like the NDP is. But that's not true. The BC Conservative Party has their own party. The UCP, which is Conservatives in Alberta, they have their own party. The PCs in Ontario, they have their own party. All the provinces have some version of a Conservative Party, but they're not all one party. They're all individual parties. And none of them have any direct relation with each other, and none of them have any direct relation with the federal Conservative Party of Canada. So, meaning, Pierre Poilievre can't call up Tim Houston, say knock it off, and have Tim Houston listen to him. Because they're not part of the same organization. That's not what happens here. Now, this is why you don't typically see the NDP going after each other, because they're all one party, right? And Avi Lewis is technically the head of that party. But that's not the case when it comes to the Conservatives. So for Bob Fife to say, well, there's an internal war going on. There's actually not, Bob, and you know darn well. You have the provincial Conservatives of Ontario and other provincial Conservatives trying to start a war, and have been trying to start a war with Pierre Poilievre since before the election. So this narrative that this only started once the election was lost by the Conservatives is factually untrue as well, and we all know it. And he goes on in this interview to talk about Pierre Poilievre and how he thinks he's going to be gone by Christmas. I talked to MPs, and Aaron Pete says, well, but his base is very much behind him. And Bob Fife says, oh, yeah, the base is behind him. But it's the MPs that actually adopted the Reform Act. We've said this before. In order for Pierre Poilievre to be ousted, 20 Conservative MPs have to publicly sign their name to a letter and put it out there. And because Bob Fife acknowledges that the Conservative base is fully behind Pierre Poilievre, whoever has any idea, which I don't believe any do, whoever has any idea on signing their name publicly to a letter and still has some semblance of an idea to remain a member of Parliament in the Conservative Party, you better run for the hills. Because that's not what the base wants. What the base wants has already been confirmed in the convention. And with the Liberals starting to lose ground in the polls, the NDP starting to gain ground, and the Conservative Party losing virtually no ground at all, you think this is a good time to actually do this? I don't think so. But this is the shocking admission that Bob Fife actually makes. That, yeah, the Conservative Party gets a raw deal in the media. Don't worry, at some point, Mark Carney will get some criticism. But, he's moving so fast, and, we can't keep up with him. And, he's getting, the benefit of the doubt. No, Bob, that's not the media's job. So stop being a biased media apologist. The media's job is not to give anyone benefit of the doubt. The media's job is to hold them to account, especially when you have a prime minister that has delivered nothing, promised everything and continues to lie to Canadians' faces. And you don't even call that out. And even you yourself twist yourself into knots that, well, yeah, the Conservatives get a raw deal, but now I'm going to crap on the Conservatives. Bob, you literally just outed it and then proved that you were right.